Welcome everybody back to Howler Bike Park. Thanks for joining us for another episode in our 2024 eMTB Shootout Series presented by Fox Racing and Schwalbe Tires. Today we're going to be checking out the Norco Range VLT C1. Rob, why don't you lead away on some of the specs and features?
Yes, so for the new Norco range, they have opted to use a high pivot suspension design like on their regular analog human-powered range. But this is a slightly different design using the iTrack patent, which basically means that the idler wheel is not concentric to the main pivot, and it allows them to tune the suspension characteristics to their liking. So this is a VPS HP virtual pivot suspension high pivot system, and definitely makes for an interesting ride out on the trails, and very interesting to see a high pivot design with a Bosch motor. I think one of the first that have really made that happen. Carbon fiber frame. They do also offer alloy versions of this in the cheaper spec models. Nice and short rear end, but with that high pivot design, it grows through the travel. And yeah, it's an absolute beast, and a bike that we've enjoyed riding a lot so far.
Absolutely, and 180 mil of travel up front, 170 with a pretty awesome RockShox suspension package with the Zeb and the Vivid Ultimate rear shock. Drivetrain duties are also carried out by SRAM in the form of the GX Axis T-Type drivetrain and SRAM code brakes. Overall, I'd say a pretty decent spec. 170 mil dropper on our size S3. I think that's worth noting. We've got a little geo chart here. If you want to dive into the numbers a little bit deeper, head to theloamwolf.com where we've got all the bikes comparatively on a nice chart for you guys to crunch those numbers. But I'm 5'11". We've got a guy that's also about 5'10", 5'11". You're 6'2"-ish. Yep. Sean is also 6'2", so we kind of opted for that S3, being that we knew the Norco e-bikes are a bit heavy, especially a big long travel burly bike. We wanted a bike that would still maintain a little bit of nimbleness and agility, so we thought the S3 with its shorter reach would help offset the weight and the big confident feel that this big travel bike would have.
So this has the Bosch Performance Line CX drive unit, 750 watt-hour battery in there. Definitely kind of gives the grunt that this kind of fairly heavy bike needs, I'd say. And really nice to see with a smart system, really clean integration. Overall, looks pretty sweet.
Alrighty, Crank Brothers Synthesis eMTB wheels, and of course, as with all the bikes in our shootout, it has Magic Marys mounted front and rear for our test constant tire. So let's hit the dirt, see how this bike stacks up in the field, out on the trail. Oh boy,
how'd she descend?
Like it climbs, a monster truck. It likes to go through big, steep, chunky stuff for sure. As Rob said yesterday, right, it definitely erases and mutes out a lot of the big hits in the terrain. You do have to work a little harder to yank and pick the bike up for stuff. You're trying to find natural little gaps and jumps on like flatter terrain, but absolutely rips, shreds, corners, all the adjectives that are really good. And it likes steep, chunky, gnarly stuff for sure. Let's talk about how the bike feels climbing, comfort, power, traction.
This is a great climbing bike because it has a lot of rear suspension to really give you maximum grip and deliver all that torque out of the Bosch system. It's really comfortable. It's got a really nice seating position, but because this is such a steep seat angle, you do feel kind of compacted into the front end for me a little bit. You know, somebody with long legs in a size 3, which is, I guess, close to a large numbers wise. Somebody with a little bit longer legs than me would be close to hitting the handlebar with their knees.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that we have the size S3, size 3.
S3.
And we're 5'11" to 6'2" in our test group. We kind of had a guess that the Norco range would be a heavy and big and burly bike, so the size 4 was just going to be a little bit too long, and I think we've kind of talked about, and we'll talk a lot more about in our grand finale, e-bikes kind of give you some inherent stability just due to the weight and mass of them, right? They keep a line a little better. However, so you have a longer reach bike that gives you stability, which was a great concept in theory on lighter bikes, but when you have that weight and mass out here on a big heavy e-bike, manualing it, coming out of a corner, wanting to lift that front end up, jumping, playing around, it kind of like exponentially takes that center of gravity and moves it out front and makes the bike feel a lot heavier. So that's why we tend to size down a little bit or opt for a shorter option when it comes to e-bike sizing. So I don't know if it's necessarily the seat angle being so steep, but it's a 467.5.
It is, I think, one of the
reach.
shortest reaches on test.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it does show until you put the seat down, and then it kind of blends in a little bit, except I think it loses some of that straight line stability of some of the longer bikes.
Sean, stability, downhill performance, what did you think?
I mean, I thought it was great. It saved my butt a couple times on just lines that I had no intention of actually taking. Yeah, I mean, like, and I thought just on Momo, which has a pretty quick drop, and you either redirect real fast to go straight down the chute or veer slight left for a less chunky section. I always found that it was able to turn on a dime and just send you straight down the chute and soak up everything in sight. And then the few times that I unintentionally went off drops that I didn't know existed, that 180 mil fork just soaked it right up, and I kept going, shaking my head in disbelief.
Any other standouts other than the life-saving nature of the machine itself?
Even though it's a burly, long travel bike, I still felt it was fairly playful on some of the jumps. I mean, you had to work for it, but it just took a little forethought to be like, okay, I gotta preload this a lot more and just kind of play with it a little bit.
It's a bit heavy of a bike at 57.5 pounds. And I also think that, you know, high pivot bikes with that lengthening rear end can also kind of make things feel a little less playful because it lengthens the rear end. The flip side is that the rear shock is very active, very lively and fluttery. So that kind of battles the other two drawbacks, if you want to call them that, and overall makes for a bike that's pretty capable and fun for the amount of travel and weight it has. It was, I would say, one of the most forgiving, one of the most comfortable and capable, I would say, at like charging rough terrain, handling big hits, eating up gnarly terrain. I think like if you are a rider who's like absolutely looking to have a self-shuttle DH bike, repeating super gnarly chunky terrain, like this is an absolute awesome machine for that application. Overall impressions, I guess, if you were gonna be dropping, you know, $8 grand on this bike.
9 grand?
9 grand, sorry.
Yeah.
89.99.
I mean,
Okay.
Zeb Ultimate with the buttercups feels great every single time, and that Vivid Air is...
Yeah, the Vivid is, I gotta say, is probably the best shock on the market right now.
Far,
Like,
yeah.
I have not ridden a bike that has that rear shock that I have not absolutely loved. I think that is an extremely forgiving, supple, beautiful piece of equipment, and it is absolutely awesome.
And it loves to take abuse.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Synthesis wheels, I'm personally a fan of.
I like 'em.
And even Rob, you know, our 220-pound bruiser has been not able to destroy these things yet, so you know, they're holding up well. The T-type drivetrain is all shifting and working well. What do you guys think about having Mavens on here instead of the current brake sped of the Codes?
I mean, I think the Code RSCs are still pretty decent. I mean,
Compared to the Maven's power, with this heavy of a bike, I think the Maven's a better spec choice.
Yeah, I would agree. I would have liked to have seen that.
Me too.
Especially because, like, for example, the RE, a very similar price point. Actually, I think it's less.
Yeah, less money.
And it has Mavens. I think for, again, how fast you want to go downhill on this bike and how much it weighs, Mavens would have been sweet. That said, though, all in all, a pretty solid spec.
A great bike.
Any downsides? I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about them throughout the ride, but
I mean,
yours was the
mine's the
short.
reach.
Okay.
Solved.
Sean, for you?
I mean, you could argue weight is a negative, but outside of that, I never really had any big complaints.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, it's kind of tricky because I don't really see any glaring negatives or things that I didn't like about the bike, but I just don't know if it's the right bike for me, and may not be the right bike for a lot of people. But I think for those who know and want a 170, 180 bruiser, then like it's a sick bike. Sizing will definitely be something you'll want to take a look at to make sure you kind of get a reach that works, so you don't have, you know, Nick's comments or concerns. But the one thing I guess I could say if I had to pick something was that I kind of felt like I was hitting my knees quite a bit, and these are kind of sharp-ish edges around the top tube and upper shock mount. So I don't know if it's a little wider than some of the other bikes or because it's got kind of more some squared off edges in the tubing, but that would be one thing that I noticed that I didn't love. Other than that though, spec, I think it looks pretty cool overall, but the downhill performance really stands out. It is insanely forgiving. You know, we've been dealing with a lot of slippery, sketchy, gnarly rocks, and it was kind of like, okay, if I just get on this bike, I know I'll be okay as long as I can keep the tires beneath me, and like it'll just eat. So I think for anyone who's wanting a boost in confidence, wanting a bike that will just erase and mute the trails beneath them, this is definitely a bike worth considering. There you have it, folks.
Do you guys like to ride chunk?
Do you guys like to ride chunk? Because the Range VLT sure does. Thank you guys again for watching. Make sure you stay tuned, as this is just one of the 14 bikes in our eMTB shootout this year. Thanks again to Fox Racing and Schwalbe for helping make this series possible, and Howler Bike Park for hosting us. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for the rest of the series. We'll see you out on the trails.